Hello and welcome back to another episode of the TF Cast. Today's date is January 26th, and we are in cold Mankato, Minnesota.
With us today, we have Dave Perron of the Freeform Freakout podcast and Bale Records. Dave, please just take a moment and tell the audience about what the Freeform Freakout podcast is about, and we'll start from there.
All right. Well, thanks so much, you guys, for inviting me on to the show. So yeah, I've been doing the Freeform Freakout podcast for about 12 years now. And I should mention that it's a branch off of the Freeform Freakout radio show, which I've been doing for now 17 years on KMSU, that I co-host with Carl, who probably many listeners or watchers of this show will know from Toontown, where I work off and on in different capacities, what have you. But yeah, the Freeform Freakout podcast started as a way for me to get into some of the more underground and experimental things that I was into that really didn't fit the format of a 2:00 show on KMSU in southern Minnesota. I like to push the boundaries a little bit, but like a 10 to 12 minute drone track in the middle of the afternoon on community radio here in Mankato, I think it might rub some people the wrong way. So yeah, I started this podcast as a way to get into some of those things that were just a little more fringe, because I was getting all sorts of stuff from writing for various publications and collecting things that I was interested in, and I just wanted to share that. And there wasn't too many places that were covering a lot of that music at the time when I started that, and certainly there are many more now. But I've been doing that, and you'll hear music and you'll hear interviews. We've done in-studio performances, like deep dives on record labels and stuff like that. So that's been going on for, like I said, 12 years now. And then Bale Recordings. So you're asking about Bale Recordings started 5 years after that. So I was mentioning to you before we started all this, like every 5 years I kind of add something on to my plate. Yeah. Not sure why that is. It occurred to me in 2020 when I was looking back on the year and kind of making notes about things like, every 5 years something new happens. But Bale Recordings really kind of happened almost on a whim. My friends who I met through the podcast, actually, I was playing their music on the show, one by the name of Nathan McLaughlin and Cody Yantis. They were releasing solo material, and one of them, Nathan, was living in Minnesota at the time, and we became friendly with one another, and they started a band together called Tilth, and they actually played their first show here at the What's Up Lounge that I helped book and arrange, and they were going to release a record. They had a record label lined up, and things kind of fell apart. It didn't happen. So they were shopping it around, trying to find something. Like, well, if you don't find anybody, why don't you let me know, and I'll just start a record label and put it out.
Well,
and
thanks.
got an email not too long after that from Nathan saying, "Hey, are you serious about that? We'd be interested in working with you and doing that." And that was sort of the impetus behind starting Bale Recordings. Really didn't have much idea. I mean, I had always entertained the idea of starting a record label, but I really didn't fully know what I was doing. So it was just kind of a learning process, which is, kind of typical of me. Just throw myself into it and figure it out as we go along. But here we are, 7 years later, still doing it and releasing stuff from people from our area, people from around the world, actually, and just various small edition tapes, CDs, LPs.
Sure. Yeah. That was it. It is not always consistent, like what medium it's coming out. How do you go about determining what medium is appropriate for what project?
Yeah. Well, yeah, originally it was going to be very small handmade editions, and I think we did that for the first couple. Like the first one, that Tilth record that I mentioned, was handmade art, silk screened edition, and then the next one I did was a lathe cut, which was edition of 30 copies, handmade lathe record. But after that, I was like, well, maybe I should try to increase the number, the editions, just to make them a little more widely available if you're going through all the work to do it and promote it. And by all means, what I'm doing is still pretty small scale. I mean, the largest edition of anything that I've done is 300, like an LP of 300. But I guess back to your question, I mean, some of it is, certain artists that I've worked with have created something specific for a format. Like there's some people that are like, I really want this to be on an LP. I've already, sequenced it in a way where it works like that. So I've done those. And some of it is just a matter of pure economics. It's expensive to put out records. And if anybody's been following things here in, the last year with COVID, I mean, publishing or putting out records is very, very difficult right now. I am putting out a new Tilth record, by the way, which will be the 25th release on the label. And the process of that goes back to the beginning of April of last year, like where I submitted all of the stuff, the masters, the artwork, and here we are. It's January, and I still do not have a physical copy of their LP in hand. So that's how, I mean, we're talking, most turnaround dates for pressing plants right now are 10 months or really about a year and beyond. So it's really tough when you're operating on a scale like I am to, invest in, you got to pay half of a pressing run up front and then you pay the other half. So to put in something that you're not going to see a return on for over a year is really difficult to do. So part of my decision really at this point is tapes and CDs, just because you can make them relatively cheap and the turnaround time is pretty quick. So that more recently has been the biggest consideration.
What is going on? I remember hearing something sometime last year, like basically it was something like the new Adele album had like eaten up like so much. Is it a higher demand or is it workers or supplies? What's up?
I think it's all of the above. I mean, I think the demand is certainly the highest it's been in, since vinyl was in its heyday, right? So it's the biggest physical format right now. I mean, it's still a small percentage when you look at how people are consuming or purchasing music. Still, streaming gobbles up I think like 75% of it. So we're talking like, 12 to 15% of people who are buying music are buying it in a physical format. So that's pretty small. But yeah, I think you've seen things that got backed up because of COVID, where plants were operating at half capacity and half staff. And then taking that in account for the fact that the demand, there's just more and more people that are wanting records. Now I think too, because no one was out touring and playing live shows, more people are wanting to release their music. So it's just like all of these factors have converged, making it very difficult. And yeah, I think to your point, some of the things like, the bigger major artists get priority because of I would imagine the volume that they're ordering and just sort of the arrangements that they have with pressing plants. So it makes it difficult for people who are operating in just the independent music world, not just, even I hear this across board because I have a lot of interaction with people that run labels, but, big labels like, pick one, but they're struggling with that too. It's across the board right now.
So with the label, what is, what's the primary thing that you're helping the artists with? What's the support you're offering them?
Well, I mean, putting something on a physical format, that would be, what they're looking for. I also
facilitate that.
I take care of all the production,
masters, and handle the printing and stuff like that.
Most of the people will submit their masters. I have other people that I work with that will do the mastering. There's a couple people in particular that I work with. So I'll do that, pay for that. So that helps on that side. Then helping with the production side of things. I'm fortunate that I have someone like Matt Irwin, who is in this area, who you probably know Matt via Megan, who's a part of Given Names, who was just on your podcast, or they represented on your podcast.
Yes.
But Matt is a fantastic graphic artist, and he's been helping out considerably with the layout and design work. So he's helped with that. Handling the manufacturing production part of it. Then I also have a few distros and record labels that I send things out to. I do all of the mail order stuff myself. So any order that you're doing through Bandcamp, that's being taken care of in my basement on my freezer, which is my mailing station.
Yeah.
So there you go, all handwritten out and all that. And then I also do all of the promotion stuff. So I have a list of media outlets, press outlets, radio podcast outlets that I send things to and maintain communication with. So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's a lot of emailing. It's not that glamorous of a gig, but it's fun to be involved in.
Are these project sizes often determined by like what it can be assumed that like these will just sell right away to the audience that they have?
Not necessarily. I mean, I'm certainly sitting on my fair share of copies. I've got a couple of racks downstairs that could use some cleaning off, but I kind of have a standard when it comes to like tape editions. I'll usually do an edition of 100, which I think for the music area that I'm working in is a pretty reasonable number. A lot of people are doing less than that. For people releasing, odd sound art and experimental tapes, so sometimes they'll do editions of 50 copies. So I think 100 copies is a pretty decent run for tapes. CDs, when you're doing those professionally, you kind of get the best rate when you're doing editions of 300. Now that's more than I would like to do, but when you start breaking it down like price point, it just makes sense. So you can send more things out or hand them out promotional copies and things like that. Kind of the same goes for records. I mean, it's cheaper when you get into that 250, 300 run. So some of it's just looking at just what makes the most sense, per unit cost.
Sure. I kind of want to like pivot back to the podcast a little bit because I have some like foundational questions about it.
Yeah.
Back when you determined the need for the podcast originally, like what were your music tastes like then? Like what was the record you were listening to at the time where you're like, oh, I'm gonna start this thing up,
Oh, that's well, like I said, I was writing for a couple of publications that were really into obscure, kind of far-flung music. One of the primary places was Foxy Digitalis, which wrote for a few years, that went on hiatus, and it's actually back now. The main guy, Brad Rose, brought it back this past year and is just cranking out insane amounts of material on there. So if people are interested in the music that's on the podcast, definitely check out what Brad is doing with Foxy Digitalis. But I was listening to a lot of, when I first started it, a lot of it was, I was getting into like the cassette underground. Sure. Like the international cassette underground, for lack of a better word or term, so it was a lot of things that were, it was like psychedelic music. It was odd folk music. It was, I suppose, noise to a certain extent, though I'm not really into majorly harsh noise stuff, but just things that probably the average listener would think sounds like noise. But I was really into like what was happening on this sort of small scale micro label thing with tapes and CDRs and self-publishing. So a lot of the things, especially even up to this day, a lot of the artists that are featured on there are people who run their own record labels, like artist run imprints. Sure. So that was a big part of like getting into that world, like how they were making their music, what inspired them, what got them into publishing their own work and working with like a community of people. So I think it was more that idea than necessarily like a certain record or something like that. But there were certain labels that I was interested in covering, and I was so, like as I mentioned to you, I've been on KMSU for a long time, and one of the weird inspirations was our show used to be right before the World Cafe. And David Dye did the World Cafe for years and years and years. And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of interesting to take that idea of, featuring artists, interviewing artists, maybe having them play live, but doing and treating it in a very serious way, but doing it on this area of music that seldom gets any coverage whatsoever. So that was, I guess, sort of the headspace, I think, looking back on it.
And in that time period, how were those things circulated? Like you're talking about the tape underground, and I imagine this is going around by like mail or forums, people talking about it and swapping these things. Is that kind of accurate? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was like predominantly mail order stuff. There were certain zines that were covering this area. I mean, there were a couple of forums. I know that you mentioned, I can't think of the name of one, but there was one that was really kind of closely tied to Foxy Digitalis, where a lot of those artists and labels were, flinging their wares through that forum. If you wanted to find out what it was that they were releasing, that was kind of the place to go. And like I said, even links through direct to like their blogs or their really like, basic websites that they were selling stuff, or like these labels and these artists were places where you would just order directly from them. Bandcamp wasn't a thing, which has streamlined things and made it very easy for people operating on this scale, where you can set up, essentially anybody could set up their own label if they wanted to.
So how's the show evolved since then, since kind of when it was created and started? What's changed about it in either the way that you produce it or the way you select music for it?
Well, I think it's longer. I mean, I think when I started it, I'd have to go back and listen. When I started, I think it was like I was trying to stick with like an hour-long show. And for the most part, it was playing music and just discussing the music, the tracks themselves. Quite quickly, though, I realized that, I wanted to be doing more interviews and features and kind of deep dives into artists and labels, things like that. I suppose just how it's evolved is that my tastes have just branched out by hearing more stuff. So I think the musical selections are maybe a little bit and back to maybe what we were talking about, I think from more places around the world. It's much more kind of outside of that pocket of just tape stuff, but just this larger network of artists, labels, and things like that. Hopefully it sounds better than before, that it's better produced. I think I have a better grasp on the audio engineering and editing side of things. Yeah, I think that's
cool. Is your listenership pretty worldwide?
Yeah. In fact, it's interesting talking to you guys about this because I rarely talk about this stuff locally with anybody.
Oh yeah, this is a Mankato program, by the way.
Right. So from what I can tell, I can see the stats and stuff from certain platforms like SoundCloud and things like that. And I would say the majority of the listenership is overseas. So.
For producing it, you mentioned that your process might have evolved or something. What skills are what do you really rely on when putting together a show like that? I think whether it's like song selection or kind of having a overall theme that directs the show.
I mean, I kind of have, I say like two formats. I mean, there's like the feature shows that I do that include an interview component, but I also break it up into like blocks of music too. So it's not just a long form interview. It's like and I design it in that way where if you listen to them, it's as though that guest is there and we're doing it all in real time. We'll set up the music block. We'll talk about that track that we're going to play and we'll jump into those tracks. So when there's a lot of front end work to prepare for it, like laying out questions that I think will cover something specific within that interview segment and then setting up that music and then being able to talk about it on the other end. So, I mean, a 2-hour show probably takes anywhere between 20 and 30 hours of front end work just for me to like research things and listen to things that I want to do and write up sort of the background of to post on the website and then to edit it all together. I mean, there's a lot of work involved in doing that.
That was actually one of the when I was researching the podcast for our podcast, I was looking at this and just how far back it goes, and like just looking at the length of the episodes and trying to digest some of them, I was just like, this guy must never stop listening to music. Like it was like kind of overwhelming because the music that you cover is something that I've always enjoyed myself. And then like I'm just like clicking through it and being like, oh, I know nothing. Like,
yeah.
And it like that's like a really kind of fun feeling to have too. But like just how much discovery do you have, and like, you know, what do you spend your time like? The listening habit. I have to know more.
Yeah, I mean, I do spend a fair amount of my, I guess, free time devoted to listening and kind of researching about a lot of this music. You know, after my day job, that's kind of my thing to come home and unwind to, is take a stack of tapes or records or even sometimes online stuff and devote a good 2, 3, 4 hours to going through that. It's not every day, but I mean, right now, for example, preparing for the next show, you know, I'll get one done. I'll take a couple days just to sit back for a little bit and then dive back into it. So it is a lot of listening, and some of it, I mean, it's exciting though too. I guess once I lose that excitement, then I'll be done. You know, I still find it fun and interesting that people are sending me things from all around the world. You know, I'll go up to KMSU and there'll be these packages in my mail slot, like artwork drawn on them and cool like designs that people are like, what the heck is this? You know, this is interesting. I want to hear it. So it's still exciting to me. And I've said, as I just mentioned, you know, as soon as it loses that, when it starts to feel like work or an obligation, then it'll be time to hang it up, I guess.
What kind of 17 years? Are you waiting for that?
That's what I'm saying. Right. I was saying to Willis before we started, I recognized a pattern. Every 5 years I added something. So maybe I'm at a point where it's like I start scaling back here. Like start getting rid of something every 5 years at this point.
Sure.
Yeah.
What type of listener are you? Are you like a very active listener, or can you like continue to do things while you're...
Yeah, both. I mean, yeah, sometimes like when I'm talking about like when I'm packaging up and processing orders, I'll throw on an album, or, you know, when I'm doing kind of mindless paperwork that I have for my job or grading stuff for my job, I'll, you know, throw on music and listen to that. But sometimes, you know, I'm multitasking, you know.
I've always found when I'm listening to music, I cannot multitask anyway.
Yeah.
So I wonder when I like see people who are just always have music on, like how it is that what that experience is like. Because I'll put a song on, and if I start paying attention to it, I'll find myself staring at the wall. You know?
Yeah, right. I should say, I mean,
music
yeah, when
on all the time person. So
when I am listening closely for preparing for the podcast and trying to assemble a playlist, I am definitely listening closely to like, what's the hook or what's the little musical linkage from this track to this track? How can I get from point A to point B that makes sense without it just sounding like this scattershot mess, you know? And also trying to link up things where there might be other interconnections, not just musical ones. Maybe there's shared membership or bands that have, you know, some historical things. So trying to piece it together in that way too, just because it's interesting. And then it's more coherent too when you're talking about that in your, you know, your talk segments that you have. Where again, other times it can just sound too fragmented. But I've been there. That's pretty common too.
Have you ever what's an example of something you've come across in some of these more experimental genres where the hook was something very unhook-like, or, you know,
oh yeah,
like you know, what's an example that someone could kind of like look into to, if they don't listen to any of this type of music, to see? Just
last night while I was listening to, I mean, it was sort of these two sound art pieces, and, you know, the end of this one track, and it sounded like, you know, if we can like, right? It sounded like that. Well, that's how the one sort of fades out and the other one begins with that sort of crunchy, you know, domestic movement taking place. It's like, it just kind of seamlessly transitions from one to the other. Yeah, nothing melodic, nothing rhythmic, but just sort of that textural piece that goes from one to the other. So I like how that, if you can have that. And sometimes there's just those happy accidents too that happen, like, wow. That worked well together.
Are there any places that you would say are like the number one, like if you want to find music that like your friends aren't going to know about? Like, what do you think? Like, it's good to just go to a record store, grab a CD, Or is there like, do you just do like Spotify related artists? Do you just deep dive Bandcamp? What would be like your guide to finding music no one knows about?
Huh. Well, I think all of the above that you mentioned. I mean, I'm personally not a Spotify user.
Oop.
We'll save that for another time. I do think Bandcamp is a good place because, a lot of the people that I'm working with and a lot of people they have their own Bandcamp pages. The artists do themselves, the labels do, and that if you're you can stream and sample the stuff there, and you can support them too. You can buy a download or you can buy a physical copy. So I do like that piece of it, and it also has, whatever information that you want about the release as well. Bandcamp also has, their old built-in editorial side of things too. With Bandcamp Daily. So if you subscribe to it, you can get recommendations and things like that. So that helps. And then, if you sign up and follow certain labels and artists, you'll get notifications when things are released. So like their next Bandcamp Friday is coming up, which I think this will probably air in that. My email inbox is probably overflowing right now with hundreds. Like, what do I look at? But that's good. And I mean, I guess just following like distro updates. I get certain record mail order sites that I have followed for years. Things like Forced Exposure, Fusetron. They carry and stock really cool stuff. So even just when they post their updates and things like that, and reading through the record descriptions, which that to me, that's exciting. Just reading about how they certain albums may sound or the background on them. So I mean, those things. I mean, I still read certain publications and blogs too. There's not as many around. I mean, when I started doing this, there were that was the blog era, and there just really isn't many people writing about music. I think there's a need for that right now.
I love podcasts now.
I know, stupid podcasters.
Just put on the podcast. We listen to the record.
right, yeah.
I recently, I used to all the time at specifically Toontown when it was in the mall, just go in there and grab a random record. That's how I learned about that's how I learned about King Crimson. Mm-hmm. That's how I learned about Korn. That's how I learned about these bands that I probably would have never heard of. And I just recently did that again when I went in to go talk to Carl about a grandma thing that we're doing with him, and I bought a Jesus Lizard album, which I'd never heard of them before.
Love that band.
Yeah, I do too now. Yeah. But like the excitement I got when I put the CD in and I liked it cover to cover was completely different than when my new favorite artist released something on Spotify.
Right.
And I can't even directly place where it was, but just having it in my hand, putting it in, and having to actually listen to the tracks. There was something, and I couldn't just I don't like this, switch to that album that I've been listening to nonstop for a week.
Well, I mean, as a record store lifer, I mean, I totally get that. Yeah. I mean, I still love doing that. I mean, that would be my preferred way of doing it. It's always exciting to me just to go somewhere, maybe with $30 or something like that, just dig through and maybe just take a chance on some things. I really am getting into, maybe what you're suggesting is CDs right now are fun because they're relatively cheap.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that, hasn't been issued on vinyl, and if it was, it would probably be $30. So it's fun to take a gamble on certain things. So when I go to the Twin Cities, oftentimes I'll go to certain record shops and just don't even look at anything else. Just look at their, and sometimes I'll go to the Electric Fetus and I'll have to set parameters for myself. And you can only look at the used CDs, and you can only look at the section with the bands that don't have their own name card. So I got to just go to the P's and the S's.
I like that.
So
I agree. That's a good way to do it. And also shout out, Carl has an awesome used CD section. It's such an awesome place to go peruse through.
Yeah. The other thing with CDs is that they sound great. People make a lot of this sounds good. They
Yeah.
say that about records, and it may be true.
Yeah.
But like CDs are actually a really high fidelity way to digest music and fun.
Yeah.
I don't think they get nearly the credit that they deserve.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I love I love I listen to digital music. I listen to tape still. I listen to record. I listen to all of it, like whatever. Some music actually works good for certain formats, especially a lot of like long form music or clean electronic music. Sounds good on CD, So I'm by no means some, I don't want to get into the whole like format stuff. I'm not too precious about any of that. I think they all work and serve a purpose.
Yeah, anything but Spotify, I get it.
Except,
But
we got into tapes early on in some of our explorations. Neither of us, I think, long history of tapes, but we both grew up with it a little bit, and then got into using it as a recording tool.
Right. Yeah.
It was even just separate from our other system. That was helpful, like having a tape deck that was always ready to receive the record arm was really pretty neat.
And I think what makes tape interesting is that it automatically has that different sound experience. That sort of tape hiss adds a layer of something. Now, some people might think that sounds like garbage, but I love a lot of music that sounds like that. That's just kind of tape saturated, a little bit lo-fi. Like I don't have a problem with that. So that's kind of my wheelhouse. So,
and then this is probably I don't imagine that people get together at tables where everyone has a nice tape machine in their house. There's like a lot of that is there's something to that, because if you go to Aldi and buy the tape player that I know is there, you're gonna have a really bad mono, like broken, warbly time, and people are like, "Oh, that's what cassettes are like," and it's like, well, if you come to my house, my cassette player sounds real nice, actually.
Some of those things, are just poorly made.
I don't
Probably
think
true with the record players.
Yes,
and
there
you can get a good stylus though.
Yeah.
You can get a good stylus, like pristine stuff. There are people making audiophile level stuff.
The the hardware store would have a little like built-in speakers and stuff.
To my knowledge, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, I don't believe that there is anyone making a professional tape device right now. There isn't it's all these basically like broken, like there's no 3-head unit coming right out from someone like Teak or something like that.
I thought I had read, or just from people that I know, I thought there is a place out there that is manufacturing, but I could be wrong. I mean, most people are getting this stuff secondhand, in some way. And there's still good decks. I mean, I honestly, whenever I see them in thrift shops or garage sales, I'll buy them just to have them, because I've lost a couple I've put a few to rest doing the podcast show, because I would still play stuff on a physical format for the show. So, but I'm not aware of any off the top of my head.
Similarly, I believe there's only one plant in the United States manufacturing tape, and they are only manufacturing Type 1 tape.
Yeah, well, that's National Audio. So that's where it's ferric tape that they made. They just started producing their own type of tape.
Oh, really?
Because the other stuff was gone.
Yeah.
So it's ferric. I can't remember. Ferric something is that they produce in-house. And they are the largest tape manufacturer in the country, and kind of the go-to for people. But I've worked, that's the place that I've gone through for every tape thing that I've released.
Do you send them the recording and they do everything in-house, or you ordered it? Okay.
Yeah, so it's really no different than like the vinyl process, so it's much more streamlined. So you just send them, I guess, the program-ready audio, so that you have everything like what your side A is and what your side B is. And you send them that, and then your artwork if you choose. They do full printing for their J cards and stuff too.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I mean, and local bands, if you want to make a tape, you could probably send them your stuff and get a tape within 2 months. It's versus 12 months for an LP.
And we talk about this quite a bit because we just like tapes. I think that they're one of the best widgets. Like if you have to sell someone a digital download code, you know, nobody wants your business card with that on that. But if it falls out of the sleeve of a tape player, that, you know, now they have a cool object.
Exactly.
You know?
And yeah, you sell a digital download code for what, $8? You can sell a tape for virtually the same. You know, most people are selling. I mean, the costs have gone up a little bit in the last year and a half, not considerably like LPs, but I mean, I still sell tapes for about $8.50. You know, I've been starting to see more people that are jacking up that price, selling them for $12. I can't bring myself to sell a tape for over $10. To me, that's just way too much.
That's what I've seen is $10. My friends have it's called Kitchen Knife Blood Pact. It's a tape label in the cities.
Okay.
And yeah, they did it specifically, if I understand correctly. I'm pretty sure because like they were having trouble getting records, and they're like, let's just make a tape label.
Yeah. It just right now it just makes more sense. I mean, you're not going to have a very functional label if you're doing LPs.
Yeah.
Like, all right, let's put that order in and wait a year. You know, it's tough. So you can at least keep some momentum, keep some activity by having tapes. Like I said, or even CDs. CDs are almost quicker. Again, they're a little, you know, they're probably double the price of tapes for about the same amount, but
That's so odd to me. I feel like a CD has to cost like 1/10 of a penny to produce.
Yeah, I feel that way too. Now you can get CDR type things that look more professional now with the full-on printing and everything, and those are cheaper. But if you want to get, you know, true glass mastered CDs, those will cost you a little bit more.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about that because there is a difference. Like if you get a CD player from the '80s, that's not going to play a CDRW.
Right.
Well, we've covered the tape label and we've covered the podcast. Is there anything else we have yet to get into that you got your hands in these days?
I don't know. I mean, I suppose I could mention that people could check out just the Freeform Freakout website because I am publishing more stuff on there, like some columns, some mixes that other people that I'm, you know, friends with that are getting involved. It just started today, actually. We're recording this website overseas called Florilegio. Hopefully I said that right. They are going to be doing a monthly mix series, and their website is a platform for kind of promoting female-based musicians working in the area of experimental music. So they're curating these mixtapes that'll feature nothing but female artists, and the first one's up on the website right now. Glenn Donaldson, who is a great musician, I encourage you to check out his music. He's put out some wonderful records under the name The Reds, Pinks, and Purples lately. That's gained actually a fair amount of traction internationally. But he does a column called The Failure of Pop. And, you know, he just basically writes little mini capsule reviews on 2 or 3 different releases that are catching his ear at that time. And that, you know, keep up with that. We don't keep that on like a monthly basis. It's more like when he has time to do it, but always great to have him involved just because he has great taste in music. And whenever I can, I try to resurrect the Down in the Bunker review column, which is usually me writing reviews while I'm listening to records down in my basement.
Oh, cool.
But that's all. Whenever I say I'm going to start it, it's like I'll get a couple in and it's like, oh my God, it's so, writing for me takes time and I don't often have the time to do that. So.
Sure. So I was gonna say, do you? I would just like. I really like when people tell stories. Do you have a story that like sticks out from one of the interactions that has come from one of your guests, or like a way that your programming has changed your life, or
for me
something like that? Yeah.
Well, I think maybe the unexpected part of it is the friends and people that I have met through doing it in real life too, like people who have come and performed shows here that, you know, these are people that I respect and admire their work that have been able to come and play here in the Mankato area, which is just like shocking to me. You know, for example, we was able to bring in Graham Lampkin, you know, great sound artist who was in the band The Shadow Ring, and he performed here in the area and played at the Arts Center of St. Peter, of all places. People like Sean McCann from Los Angeles, we flew him in and he performed at the Arts Center. There's the list could go on, but the fact that we've been able to, just through this like show that you meet and have people on that people that I still communicate with and have interactions with. So that's been, to me, like the best part of it. And of course, just hearing cool stuff that I probably would have never have heard without doing the show.
Yeah, it's a funny memory I have. I just came to my head. American Cream. They came down to
Yes.
It was the oddest thing because I listened, like, it was a show at the 410 Project, and I like looked into their music and I had this real expectation. They showed up and it was not like, when they set up, I was like, oh, like that couldn't possibly sound like what I heard on their website. And then they just played C. They played a C minor chord for about 20 minutes. And I was like, why did they do that? And at the time, like, I hadn't listened to any of the podcasts. And then it was either you or Dana who I said, why did they do that? And they said, well, probably because of the Freeform Freakout thing.
Yeah.
And when that was the first time I ever checked out the podcast.
Oh, really?
I was just like, what's going on here?
Yeah, but I wasn't expecting that either.
I enjoyed it.
They were planning something special, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, maybe a riff on Terry Riley's In C or something. But yeah, it was like 3 synth players just laying it down for a good chunk of time.
C minor.
That was an interesting show. Jameson's acoustic / power electronics noise set, followed by that, and then Magnetic Ghost played afterwards, kind of this dreamy psychedelia. So.
We've been to both the shows you mentioned. Well, the one that we were just talking about there, and then I think the St. Peter one you mentioned too. And they've been some of my favorite shows in town too, just because they are like different and fun to be at. They really present a different opportunity for people to check out.
Yeah, shout out to Anne at the Arts Center of St. Peter for being receptive to doing that and hosting those events. I mean, that's something that you wouldn't think of happening in our area, and having bands from out of town that have come in, or artists coming in from out of town. I hope to do that again at some point. It's like we had one planned for April of 2020, bringing in a couple of people that were traveling from out of town. And of course, we just had to scrap that. And I just really haven't been interested quite yet to jump back into that. Just, it's hard to plan things when there's just so many question marks. So we'll see, maybe in the summer or something like that. I'd love to do it.
Yeah.
We'd be excited to see him. I know we all like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
A bunch of our audience does too. So.
Yeah.
The last question that I had prepared was about, have you ever yourself been a musician or worked on any projects like that?
Yeah, I don't call myself a musician. I tinker, let's put it that way. I mean, I have guitars and keyboards and percussion and recording stuff, and over the years I've tinkered around with that and recorded things, but I probably, because I just don't have the patience to really stick with it. Where, like, that sounds, I enjoy doing it, but I don't, I think that's probably why I like the podcast and like, I can move on quickly from it. You know what I mean?
You have the patience for something that's nearly more easily as complex. So we don't think it's a lack of your patience.
Yeah.
But maybe
I don't know.
I too love owning keyboards.
I love making racket. My son right now is getting into guitar and making music and learning songs. And so lately we've been, I'll join him occasionally and just bash out some stuff and make some noise in the basement. But there was a point, tying it back to maybe the podcast and stuff, I was thinking, there's not enough people doing or covering this area of music. There's far too many musicians releasing it. So maybe the world doesn't need another person making recordings. I'll just be the guy that covers that area of music for the time being. And maybe when it's done, maybe that 5-year progression, once I've wrapped up, maybe then when I'm old and withered, I will make that noise record that I've been just
what
you've been simmering it for the last
right. I've got
years.
these ideas, but I need time.
What is the temperament of a lot of these musicians? I mean, like I feel like I've met a good number of people who are doing this kind of like synth noise stuff, and a lot of them are kind of unceremonious about it.
Yeah. I haven't had that experience really. I mean, most of the people that I've had interactions with have been fairly good natured. Like easy to get along with.
Yeah.
So I can't think of anything that stands out as like, ooh, that was rough.
I meant like they like just do it all the time.
Oh,
You know
yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's not like they're putting on like this big thing. It's just like they do it and then they either like they're pressing record because they feel guilty that they haven't, or like, they need to justify that they have a giant modular in their house or something. Like,
right. Yeah. That's a whole other world. Yeah. People go into that and lose themselves. I have some friends that have talked about the whole modular world and continuing to add new things
Like
to
the
it.
deep end of a synth exploration. You got your one friend who like went off the deep end. You're like, oh, don't ask him about that.
His entire bathroom wall or bedroom wall is filled with modular racks, right?
I got one more, and then we can do plugs and stuff. But if I could just get a 1 to 3 of some must listens of either 2021, or if you already have that many in 2022, I would love to hear like 1 to 3 must listens.
Oh my. Well, I did. If you're curious, I posted like a favorites of the year on the website.
Awesome.
Yep.
That's big.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So and I'm just trying to think. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff like from rock music, pop, and electronic things.
Even just a knee jerk, like no one else take offense if they don't get said. Just like a knee jerk must listen.
Well, I think I said on the air because I had Glenn on. We did Glenn Donaldson, who I mentioned before. And I told him that I think the album that I listened to most was Rosalie's album called No Medium, which is just like probably of all the records on that list is like the most tame.
Yeah.
But it's such a good record. I mean, it's just really ragged, kind of Americana tinged rock record, maybe a little bit of Neil Young Crazy Horse to it. I mean, she was backed up by the David Nance group from Omaha, and they recorded that record. And we actually, speaking of shows, like David Nance, we brought him. He's played here in Mankato a couple times at Mankato, and if he would be someone I would love to bring back. Their group's fantastic, just good, rugged rock and roll.
Okay.
So that's a record, that I like.
cool. Well, where do people find it? If they're looking to hear the podcast, find your written, spoken, any kind of work.
Yeah, I suppose the main hub is the Freeform Freakout website, so just freeformfreakout.com. From there, you could probably link up to all the other social media connections. I mean, we have a SoundCloud page. There's a Mixcloud where we host the podcast and the mixes that I was mentioning before. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
And if
We're
they
there.
want to hear you on the air,
Yeah, so the weekly radio show is on Thursdays at 2 p.m. on KMSU, and then the podcast actually does air over the airwaves as well. So it's on Monday nights at 11 p.m. and it's a bi-monthly show, so there'll be 2 weeks of the same episode, and then and then the next episode, which are 2 weeks back to back. You can also, if people are in New York, there's a community radio station there called WGXC, which is a terrific community radio station. They also rebroadcast the podcast once a month. I think it's the second Monday at 10 o'clock at night. They air it. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, hey, thank you for joining us.
yeah,
and
thanks so much,
chatting.
you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, we're clear.
Clear.
Good.
Cool.
All right.